Welcome to the Enlightening Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Emily Hamblin, and I am so excited to talk to you today about all things neurodivergence and sleep. Super excited to have our sleep specialist, Lindsey Clark, with us. Welcome, Lindsey.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here. Yeah, I can't wait to kind of share everything with everyone today, give lots of tips and advice.
Fantastic. Lindsey, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I am a sleep consultant and work specifically with autistic children and those with high levels of anxiety. So my background's in education. So I was a teacher for 20 years before I did this. So I've got quite a lot of experience in working, obviously, with children of different ages. And I've got two children of my own as well who we've struggled with sleep, over the years, which is how I kind of got into this. One of them is suspected autistic. Here in the UK, diagnosis takes like 2 to 3 years. So we're still waiting for that. And my partner's autistic too. So obviously, I have that personal kind of interest and knowledge about it as well.
Fantastic. Well, we can't wait. This podcast episode will be a little bit different than most of my podcast episodes because I polled my community and we had so many parents jump in with really specific, complicated questions about some sleep struggles that they're facing. So most of today's questions come pretty much directly from the community. We're going to try to make it more cohesive as a podcast episode, but we're just going to start to jump in. I guess as a general thing, what are some of the most common sleep challenges you see with neurodivergent kids?
So the most common things tend to be struggling to fall asleep and having very late bedtimes. And when I'm talking very late, like midnight, past midnight sometimes. And then the sleep kind of being out of sync and there being issues with circadian rhythm. So sometimes it might feel like children are almost like wired to a different time zone, and not the one they're necessarily in. So their sleep pattern can be off. The other thing I see a lot is waking in the night, often waking up for long periods in the night, or seemingly waking in the night and actually they don't go back to sleep. So morning ends up being 3 a.m., 2 a.m., things like that. It's very, very common. And often there's kind of high levels of anxiety involved, not wanting to go to bed, feeling worried about going to bed and things like that, which I know we're going to touch on a bit later as well. So, yeah, they're the most common things.
Mm, I can relate to many of these. Before we dive in too deeply, we're talking a lot about neurodivergent kids. Do they actually have different sleep cycles or different sleep needs than what we might see in a neurotypical child?
It's not that they have different sleep needs. Often they will sleep less than a neurotypical child, but it doesn't necessarily mean they need less. It's just that sleep is more difficult for them. So there ends up being less. And it's not that their sleep cycles are different, it's that their circadian rhythm, which is the body clock, can be wired differently. And that's what makes the sleep patterns kind of out of sync, or they don't fit with kind of the social norms of where you would want the sleep to be ideally. So obviously that makes it difficult if your body naturally doesn't sleep when it gets dark, or rise when the sun comes up, which is it makes things like going to school difficult. And I know lots of your community had to kind of express concerns over that. So it is something that's very common.
Mm. Some of our community also was wondering about a like non 24-hour sleep cycle. It seems like their kids sometimes wants to go to sleep at 6 p.m., but the next day they don't want to go to sleep until 11 p.m. And they almost feel like there's like a non 24-hour sleep cycle. What might be going on there?
Yeah, again, it's to do with the circadian rhythm, and like often it's obviously quite complex, so it's difficult to go into it without kind of going too scientific. But often it's the sleep. If it is kind of all over the place, we need to kind of work out how much sleep that child needs in the 24-hour period and try and get it into the best place possible. And obviously, there's lots of techniques and things you can use. It's going to be different for every child because their age and, often their activity levels and their sensory needs and their anxiety levels all play a part in that too. It might be that on a day where their sensory needs have been met more, they'll go to sleep easier at night. So that can play a part in that too. It's not just a case of looking at their sleep pattern, which is why it is so complex to figure out. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. Okay, so this is fantastic. So we have neurobiology at play, like they're, if they are autistic or have ADHD, etc. And we also have kind of this bigger picture of the whole child, not just their neurotype. Well, perhaps that day they had different sensory input. Perhaps that day they saw more sunshine. Maybe,
Yeah.
diet, fighting off an illness. I think that there's a lot of things that can be at play here, and we're
Yeah.
often so focused on one thing. I love that you brought it back out to the whole child view there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what I do when I work with families. Like, certainly we need to not just focus on the sleep because a lot more is at play and a lot more is going to affect the sleep than just the sleeping part. So yeah, it's all of those things that you just said, and more as well. Like the fact that we haven't even mentioned yet, which I think we were going to mention in a bit, but it makes sense to mention it now, is, in autistic children, it's found that they don't produce as much melatonin as neurotypical children. So that it's a natural hormone that we produce that helps us to fall asleep. If that is not kind of there, or if it's less, again, that plays a part too. It's going to be harder for them to fall asleep and stay asleep. Interestingly, though, it does tend to even out once they reach adulthood. So it is an issue in childhood. So, parents are listening to this, no, it won't always be the case. And like I said, that's not the only thing playing a part, but it is certainly another thing to consider as well.
That is so good to know. I actually didn't know that it leveled out in adulthood. I did know that melatonin production was often, not always, but often kind of
Mm.
lower in autistic individuals. So, yeah, are there any other factors that parents should consider when they're looking at the whole view of the child that could be contributing to the sleep challenges
Yeah,
that they're
I
facing?
mean, the other thing that obviously can happen with neurodivergent children, neurodivergent people in general, like the just the way that the brain is wired, the connections tend to be more intense. The brain doesn't filter out information or kind of information that you don't necessarily need in the same way that a neurotypical person's would. So there's obviously a lot more information being stored. Those connections are more intense. Therefore, the brain kind of, they call it overconnectivity, basically. But where there is so much more kind of swelling information going on, that's going to make it more difficult for the brain to switch off too.
Mm.
So that also plays a part in that, helping, you can't necessarily change that, but there are ways to help a child or an individual to process their thoughts, and things like using visual aids can help with that and try and kind of keep the focus on what you're doing. There are lots of things you can do to help with it, but it's also taking that into mind as well. And I've certainly had to do that again with my own daughter as well. Have to kind of adapt the way you're doing things and tailor it to them.
Mm. You just gave me a big aha moment for myself, Lindsay.
Oh, really? My
My
partner gets,
husband versus I, we've been married now for coming up on 17 years, which is so
yeah,
exciting. And our whole marriage, he's like, he goes to sleep and he lays down and then he closes his eyes and he falls asleep.
yeah,
And he's neurotypical. I'm neurodivergent. And I lay down and I like find one position, then another, then another. And then I think of something to tell my husband, but he's
yeah,
already asleep. And then my brain starts to go through what we did during the day, and I'm about to fall asleep. Then I have like the best idea ever for like the neurodivergent survival kit that we're building. I get so many good ideas right before I fall asleep. So then I'm awake again and I'm pulling out my
yeah.
phone to
Gotta
take
write it down.
notes. And yeah, you just explained so much that it is
Yeah,
in that sense for me, it's kind of a gift, but there's a lot of obvious challenges that are that are going along with it there.
yeah, exactly. And if you think like you're an adult, so you're able to think about that. In
Yeah.
children, they don't know that and they can't kind of process that in the same way. So it's really hard when they've got a lot going on, if they've been at school and they've had lots of sensory experiences too, and all that's going on as they're trying to then switch off. Like, it is hard to switch your brain off. You almost like have to learn how to do it, don't you? And for children, obviously, that's, especially young children, that's really difficult and something that kind of comes with time and practice as well.
Oh, this is so good. There's one more challenge before we start going into some of the, like, maybe some tips for what to do. A lot of neurodivergent individuals have a demand avoidance. Some might be diagnosed with PDA, some don't. They just seem a little bit resistant to being told what to do. And this definitely is at play with kids. Our community had many people coming and saying, what do I do when my
Mm.
child sees going to sleep as a demand, even if they're tired and they want to, but they resist it because it feels like a demand?
Yes. And actually, I forgot to mention at the start, I'm actually a PDA specialist, and my
Okay.
daughter has traits of PDA, should we say? Should I say she's not diagnosed yet, but certainly we have experienced a lot of demand avoidance. So I totally understand. And yeah, sometimes it is that the sleep itself is seen as a demand, that, it feels like something you can't control. There is so much to do with going to bed and going to sleep that is demanding. If you think about just even the little statement that we say, like, it's bedtime now, even if you're not giving a direct demand, that insinuates so many demands. You've got to go upstairs, you've got to go to the toilet, you've got to brush your teeth, you've got to get changed. Like, and that's a lot. And to a child, with a PDA profile or the demand avoidance, that raises anxiety levels and then makes the demand of going to sleep, like the final one,
Mm.
even worse. And even things like, having no control over the day ending or the next day starting or the dreams that they might have, to a demand avoidant child or individual, it's a lot. And it's that feeling, that pressure of like not being able to control it and having to do all those things. And in terms of making it better, I mean, certainly like the way a parent uses language is going to be key. Trying not to give things as a direct demand. Again, this is often where I kind of bring in visual aids and get children to have control over it. So you kind of pick, what do we need to do for our bedtime routine? You can decide what order, stick in some things in there that they like as well. Even if that means having a bit, we've had to do this in my household, having a bit of time to do some colouring in between the things she doesn't like as much, just so that you've if you see a whole visual aid or, picture cards is often what I use of things you don't really like doing. You're not going to really want to do them, are you? So we
Mm.
add in a few things that they do like, try and lower the demand as much as possible, sometimes making things into like, and again, this is going to be individual to the child because not everything is going to be right for every child, but making things into a game, using different timers if that they are okay with it. I say we have
Mm.
varied experience of using timers in our household, but certainly like the language, taking the pressure off, allowing extra time is key. And as a parent as well, sometimes just letting go of what you're told about like the ideal bedtime or what it should look like,
100%. Yeah.
because it's not necessarily going to be the right thing. Like I'm a sleep consultant. I don't always tuck my daughter in at night and she goes straight to sleep. It is pretty good at the moment, but we do go through phases where that doesn't happen. And I do need to think outside the box. And I've worked with lots of children where we've had to kind of like break the rules, shall we say, of what you would.
First of all, and secondly, incredibly helpful. A lot of times, all things parenting, and like bedtime is our example now, but all things parenting, there's these like stories that society tells us of what it should be like and how it should look like. And just to be able to go back and think, well, why? Like my children don't wear pajamas. Actually, my daughter does. My daughter will change her clothes 12 times a day. She loves to change clothes and put on new clothes. But my three boys, they've chosen to not wear pajamas, and that's something we let go. One of my kids really wants to go to sleep, but struggles with the getting ready to go to sleep at night. And so just reframing it from, okay, you need to go brush your teeth now, to saying, would you like to brush your teeth right now?
Yeah.
And if
Or
they
even
say no, then
what,
I might say, okay, when do you want to brush them? And for
yeah,
this particular kid, that works really well. He'll say 5 minutes, and I'll say, okay, do you want to set the timer or do you want me to set a timer? And so
yeah.
it's just handing so much back that it's really helped.
Yeah, I have to do similar with my daughter. If I go to her with a toothbrush, she's just going to run away. So, and she's probably screaming as well. I have to literally put the toothbrush to the side and say, there's the toothbrush. So I don't
Mm.
any kind of demand like there. And it does get done. It just takes a little bit of time. And like you said, it can be frustrating, but we get it done. And I had a little boy recently actually that I worked with who he was only 3 or 4, coming up to 4, but mum said, oh, he falls asleep really well at bedtime with the light on, but then I go in and turn it off, and then he wakes up in the night screaming. We have a massive tantrum because the light's off. And I was like, why don't we just leave the light on then? Is that a problem? And she was like, can I do that? Is that all right? It's like, let's see. It's not like a problem health-wise or anything. So I don't see why we can't. And do you know what? We left the night on all night and he had the best night's sleep he'd ever had. So
Oh.
it's things like that that you, like you said, you sometimes you almost need to hear someone else say it's okay.
Yeah, like you feel like you need permission.
Yeah, yeah, just because it's not like the norm, but if
Mhm.
it works for the child, then that's and they're getting the sleep, that's the most important thing.
Oh, that's so good. And
Mhm.
that toothbrush example is always just so easy to go back to. I have another child who doesn't mind brushing their teeth. They just don't want to put the toothpaste on themselves. They're old enough to. Right
Yeah,
there. And the story in my head tells me that my kid's never going to learn to put toothpaste on their toothbrush if I keep doing it for them. And I
yeah,
remind the story, I'm pretty sure by the time they're 15, they're going to want to do it themselves, you know?
yeah,
And so we have a
yeah,
big, long gap between where they are now and 15. And at some
yeah,
point, they'll start doing it. But for now, to me, that's just become so low priority. Our bedtime routine's like super simplified from my first kid, where I thought bedtime should look like, to where it is now. We've just cut
yeah,
out a lot of the what I think I should do and left
yeah.
it for what we've learned works for us.
Yeah, definitely. And like that's what I would recommend anybody do, do what's best for your child. If you need to cut out things, that's absolutely fine. Like we had similar with getting dressed. My partner would constantly say to me, when is, my daughter's 7 now, but at the time when she started school, you want them to start getting themselves dressed, like it was just never going to happen. And I said, there's absolutely no point doing this battle and the change to bedtime as well. We'll just do it. He's like, but she has to learn, and I was like, it's not that she can't do it, but why have the battle every day? It's not like she's never going to do it. Do you know what? Now she does it. It just happened. Over the last couple of years, she'll get herself changed for bed. In fact, she'll do it without me even saying anything. So it's, I think it's letting go of it for now, not forever.
Yes, that's so good. And especially if you have a neurodivergent brain like me, there's this urgency like, but if we don't do it now, then it will never happen. And to remind myself, no, this one will, I'm pretty sure it will happen. It's just
Yeah,
not right now.
it will. It will.
Oh, that's so good. Any other, I love the phrase that you used with the toothbrush, like, here's your toothbrush. Are there any other like phrases or examples you can think of that have worked really well?
I mean, it's more kind of like if they're getting changed and things like that, like just saying things like, there's your clothes, or the one we have, it's not bedtime related, but is leaving the house is difficult. If I say, like put your shoes on and get your coat, it's just not going to happen. I say my
Yeah.
daughter comes and hides, then my son copies her. So I have to just say, like, we're leaving now and the front door's open and I'm ready to get in the car and hope that, they generally do now come downstairs or come out and we'll get shoes and coat on rather than telling them to do those things. So it's things like that and trying to think about how can you say it without saying it,
Mhm.
that is key. And that can, in some cases, especially with like demand avoidance and around the bedtime that you were talking about, not wanting to go to sleep, sometimes not even talking about sleep or bedtime. If you've got a child who's really resistant, let them do something else in bed. Like we've had to do this in my household before. We bought her like a lap pad and she would do colouring in bed because colouring's her kind of thing, crafting.
Okay.
And when she was having those anxieties around going to sleep and not wanting to go to sleep, and she was saying to me as well, like, I just can't go to sleep, mummy. I just can't do it. We've had bedtimes at midnight before, and just having the lap pad in bed and doing drawing would chill her out enough and help her brain relax enough that actually, when I did go in and say, right, lights out now, she could then relax and go to sleep. And we got to the point where actually she was turning her own light off. And that's ended up getting earlier and earlier, along with other things that I've put in place too. She is now asleep for like 8:30 every night. And I would have never thought that would happen a while back. So
That's why
um
you became a sleep consultant. You're like, I
yeah.
need to help others with this.
Yeah, exactly. So it's again that's not going to be right for every child, but that kind of worked for us. If you can kind of take the pressure off and just not even mention that it is sleep time, and distract with something else they do like doing, then actually you can then work on, them just they're relaxed in bed. That's the first part that we need, because if we're not relaxed in bed, we're not going to go to sleep. And then, things will gradually, you can start to get things to fall into place.
This is fantastic. Lindsey, I had a thought pop up that I wish we had actually begun when we talked about demand avoidance. There might be people that are listening or watching this right now that have actually not heard of PDA or understand demand
Okay.
avoidance. And I know our society makes these kids sound like these spoiled little brats that
Oh,
can't even
yeah.
do what they're asked. And so, in, a really concise, as much as you can, what is PDA and why is it more of a medical condition than it is like a child being naughty?
So it's basically an anxiety-driven need to have kind of control, basically, and to have that. I mean, I know that they call it kind of PDA, pathological demand avoidance. Over here, I don't know if it's the same where you are. They're trying to kind of rename it persistent drive for autonomy. So
Yeah.
just wanting that independence. And it's just this, I say it's all related to anxiety. And when you're asked to do something, feeling that pressure, those anxiety levels raise, and it's easier to just say no and not do the thing than have to kind of like make a choice or deal with the pressure that's being put on. So
Mhm.
it is kind of, yeah, like it's a profile within neurodivergence as well. So you can't have a PDA profile without being neurodivergent either.
Okay. Thank you so much for bringing that up. It helped me to think of it as when a child with demand avoidance, I'm not even going to say PDA because so many kids are not able to get that diagnosis right now, but a
Mm,
child with demand avoidance, just for the purposes of this podcast, don't worry. But
yeah.
if a child with demand avoidance is told to do something that they have like stress and that they feel threatened,
Yeah.
and Mona Delahook called it once avoidance. They're trying to
Okay.
protect their nervous system. And so they have a demand avoidance to protect themselves. And that's really been helpful for me to consider that with my kids who we don't have any sort of official PDA diagnosis. I'm suspicious with two of them, but we don't have it yet. And I even asked like the doctor that diagnosed them with autism, I asked them, "Oh, do you do PDA? Like, did you sense any PDA?" And they were like, "Well, what's that?" So it's
Really?
it's, you know, we're kind of in a middle ground, I feel like, with a lot of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not diagnosed here in the UK either, but from what
Yeah.
I've heard more recently, people that are getting diagnosed, it might say like diagnosed autistic with demand avoidant traits or
Mm,
elements of demand avoidance rather than
okay.
it actually saying like PDA, and diagnosing that. So yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. And that feeling of being feeling threatened and like the pressure, it makes the stress rise, and it's yeah, it's therefore difficult to cope with the demand.
Yeah. And I have it in one of my kids who's actually rather easygoing in general, but when I tell that kid to do something, I see like I just see like the stress. Like I can see the jaw clench and I see like the chest start to rise and they kind of breathe heavy. And sometimes they will do it, but I'll see like this initial like
Mm,
okay, it's almost like they're talking themselves through something that's really a lot harder for them than it might be for me if someone asked me to do it.
yeah. And that's, I think that that happens with a lot of children. I mean, we get the running away, hiding, or now that my daughter's a little bit older, we get like a plausible excuse not to do something. So if it is like time to brush her hair, let's say, I won't even say it, I'll just approach with the brush. And it's, I need the toilet, or I've got to get something. She doesn't really, but it's just to so that she then has the control back when I do it.
I see
And
that in
I've
my other kid.
I've just learned to be
Yeah.
like, okay, you do the thing, and then I'll do it in a minute.
Or we
You
have,
just kind
I
of,
even
yeah,
see my kid say things that aren't true. I don't think it's the same as purposefully lying. Like,
yeah,
okay, go wash your hands when I'm not thinking of their demand avoidance. Okay, go wash your hands. They're like, I already did. And I
yeah,
know that they didn't.
yeah, exactly. Or the other thing I get, and I think this is quite common as well, is going into role. So it's like I'm not doing it to her. I'm doing
Mm,
it. So we get this at bedtime. We at the moment it's a cat. So I have to treat her like a cat. Say,
Oh,
Kitty, let me stroke your fur. And then she feels okay with me doing it
oh, that's
because I'm not doing it to her, I'm doing it to Kitty.
oh.
So some children will do that and will go into role, and then it can be easier. Um, and that may last for a period of time, and
Mm,
things
I
change,
like
don't
that.
they? But sometimes it's easier to kind of play along and do that role play to get the things done and to ease the anxiety over bedtime. Because yeah, it's like it's not them that it's happening to then. If that makes
Mm.
sense.
Oh, yes, that's fantastic. I love it. Another thing that my kid likes, of course, asking instead of telling, would you
Yeah.
like?
Mm.
Would it be helpful? And one of my kids, I would say, would you like to race me to see who washes their hands first? And sometimes he'll be like, no. I'm like, okay, well, it wouldn't have worked anyway, so I'm glad I didn't try. And other times he'll be like, yeah, and then he gets a head start from
Yeah.
me, and that's pretty fun. Then I pretend like, oh, that's not fair. Hey, come back. That wasn't fair. Look, you're washing already. And of course, I'm fine with it, and he knows it. But it's
Yeah.
just a fun way
And
to do that.
yeah, definitely like making things into games, and it just takes the pressure off a little bit as well. The other one that we do is, if they don't want to go upstairs to bed, or like just getting that start of the bedtime routine done. Like sometimes they'll be like, oh, can you like should we hop up the stairs like bunnies, or like slither up like a snake or something like that? And then it just piques their interest a bit more. And then, they're more likely to do it. It doesn't work every time, but another thing to kind of have up your sleeve that just takes the pressure off that let's go upstairs now, let's go upstairs now,
Yeah.
let's get ready for bed now. And makes it a bit more fun.
That's great. And it sounds like more fun for the parents too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So with parents who are choosing now between waking their tired child up who didn't go to sleep until 1 a.m. and now it's time for school, or the child falls asleep on the bus coming home and they know if they wake them up that like they need to wake them up in order for them to go to bed, but if they do, the child's going to melt down and kind of be in a rotten mood all evening. What advice do you have for those really tricky situations? Do we wake the kid? Do we not wake the kid?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously very general advice because I would need to look at like the age of the child, exactly what's going on, how much sleep they're getting, and things like that. Generally speaking, if a child's body clock is like completely out of sync and they're sleeping very late at night and sleeping in the morning, I wouldn't suddenly just start waking them early. I would try and shift it gradually because, like you said, they're going to end up with a big sleep debt then, going
Mm,
to be really overtired, not going to be very pleasant for anyone, and they're likely to fall asleep at a different time. And again, that's going to then have a knock-on effect with bedtime the next day. Like you said, they might fall asleep on the school bus, or in the middle of the day, and then that's going to then have an impact on that night. The circadian rhythm in neurodivergent people tends to be more fragile as well. So like 10 minutes sleep here cannot, in the afternoon, say, could knock 3 hours off bedtime. And then
mm,
actually they end up with less overall sleep. So we do want to try and shift the sleep into the places that you want it. In terms of like napping, I would always try and keep a child awake if they're like beyond the age of napping, so probably over about 4. I would try and keep them awake and distract and prevent that daytime napping, because again, that will just completely offset the nighttime sleep. We want to try and get that sleep into the night. And I say every case will be different,
yeah.
but generally I would try and keep them on the as close to where you want the sleep as possible.
Mm. Okay, that's good. You did great generalizing something that's not general. So you're
Yeah.
doing wonderful, Lindsay. Thank you. We're going to shift to another topic that we had quite a few questions on: fear, nightmares, the like, I'm afraid to go to sleep. Like some of the kids have said, I'm afraid to go to sleep. I'm worried I'll have nightmares. I don't want to go to sleep. So they really fight it over that like fear of actually being asleep.
Yeah, and I think in cases like that, and there's obviously like that anxiety there, sorry, about kind of going to sleep and not wanting to have a nightmare. We need to really work on kind of like the growth mindset of the child. And again, it's going to depend on their age, but
Mm.
doing things like social stories around that. Have you heard of social stories before? I
Yeah,
don't want to assume people that know what that means,
I do,
but
but I don't know if our listeners have.
yeah, so like a social story is just a short description or a short story where the child in question is usually the main character, and it talks through an event, something that's happening or something that's going to happen, with the idea being that it then prepares that child kind of for it. So doing social stories around like bedtime and going to sleep, helping them feel more comfortable, what's going to happen at bedtime, what's going to happen if they wake up in the night, and
Mm,
giving them those like strategies. And again, this depends on the child's age, so the strategies would be different depending on how old they are. But giving them strategies for what happens if they do wake in the night and they've had a nightmare, because we can't control that not happening. Nobody can.
yeah.
But we want to make sure they feel as comfortable as possible. Um, Another thing that can be quite powerful with slightly older children is even just taking a photo of them asleep and showing them and saying, hey, look, you can sleep. Look, here you are. You're
Mm,
asleep. You're sleeping great here. And things like small things like that can make a big difference. I mean, I've had little ones before where they've been worried about going to sleep and like a parent not being there. And a parent's got their kind of face printed on a cushion and we put it in the bed, and that's like really helped them. I'm not saying they never woke
really?
up and chatted with mummy or daddy again, but things like that you put in place, having a photo under their pillow, or next to them of a parent, or a special new sleeping toy, things that we can use to try and help them feel more secure and comfortable in their
Mm.
sleep space, basically.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. My daughter loves to have my husband sleep next to her in bed, and he's actually the exhausted one now. So I might go. I might go order a little pillow of his face and
Yeah,
not tell him and just surprise them both with it. See if that's
yeah. But yeah, for some children, it does really, really help. And like then they can obviously form the attachment to that. They can cuddle it in the night. You can put that in their social story. If you wake up in the night and you're scared or you're alone, you cuddle the daddy pillow or, whatever it may
yeah.
be. That's the thing about the social stories. You can tailor it to the child. You
Mhm.
can even put photos in, make your own, and you can download them online as well.
Yeah.
But it it's not going to be one single thing, if you see what I mean. There's like a
Yeah.
whole repertoire of things you can put in place that are going to be right for any one individual child.
I love that. I love it. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's sleep consultant approved, but when my 3-year-old started to have nightmares, I got a little thing of natural deodorant, the doTERRA. It's like completely non-toxic deodorant. And I told her that it was good dream deodorant and she
Oh,
can rub
right,
it on
yeah.
her belly. And she like death grips that thing at bedtime now. And if she's falling asleep and feels afraid, she opens it and I see her rubbing it on her belly and she's like, I'm gonna have good dreams.
Oh, bless. Well, I've seen people have like, like magic dream spray and things
Yeah.
like that before. With my daughter, when we went through the nightmares phase, because it does tend to be a phase, these things come and go. We got her a dream catcher, and I said that catches
Mm.
any dreams before, and she's got it above her bed, and I said that catches any bad dreams, they won't come. And if she does have a bad dream, she'll sort of say, "Oh, that one slipped through," but that doesn't happen often. So
Oh,
it's
that's
some
great.
of those things too.
Another one we did with my daughter, we went on to ChatGPT and I put in her characteristics and I said, make me a beautiful watercolor of a little girl that looks like this hugging Jesus. And we printed that and we put it on her wall. And it helped for about a month. She said she would wake up and touch the picture and then go back to sleep.
Oh yeah, that's
Then it
definitely a
stopped
good
working
idea.
after a
Yeah.
month, but it worked for
I
a
think
while.
this is the thing, isn't it? Like some things will work brilliantly and you don't have to worry again. Other times things will work for a bit, or the nightmares might kind of go away and they might resurface later. And it's just having those things kind
Hmm.
of up your sleeve as well. One thing that does, you said about like your son, sorry, was it your son wanting daddy
No,
there? One,
it's my daughter, but it's fine.
sorry.
One of my kids, one of my kids. I have
Um,
a lot of them. It's fine.
And one thing you can do, obviously you have to be careful, like safety wise with this, is sometimes if they want you really close, and this is a technique I use with children that are anxious about being left alone, is to do something called, well, there's a book that you can read called The Invisible String. That's a really good one, that kind of helps with this visualizing of this technique that I'm about to talk about. But having like a ribbon, and you get the child to hold one end, and the parent holds the other end while you fall asleep. So you're still connected. What you can do is each night move a little bit further away, but they're still connected to you until eventually you're kind of out of the door. And then obviously once they're asleep, you need to take it away, you know, for safety reasons. You don't want that getting tangled up. But then it's just still having that connection, sort of still touching each other, if you
Yeah,
see what
yeah,
I mean.
like a physical.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and having something to hold on to, that can work quite well with some children who want a parent right next to them, just so
I'm
you
gonna
can
try that one.
edge away.
I love it. Oh, I love it. Okay. So, what about kids who are, like we said, anything else if they need the parent right next to them when they fall asleep or they wake up and they have to have the parent right back next to them?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's going to depend on kind of why that's happening. When I work with families, I try and get to like the root of the anxiety, because there's obviously some kind of anxiety there.
Yeah.
That's why they want the parent present. So
Mm,
again, I like it can be completely different for every child, but if we can work on that, and it can take time, it can mean talking to their school or their nursery or, you know, their daycare about what's going on there. Is there anything that's causing the anxiety? Adding in things as well during the day that are going to help to lower the anxiety. Because if you think, you know, like you kind of get that bucket analogy, don't you, of like anxiety builds up during the day, doesn't easily filter out for everybody.
mm,
Um, so at bedtime, it's at its highest. So that's when they want that extra reassurance and comfort. And obviously, it's dark, you know,
yeah.
and there's no distractions, is there, when you wake up in the night? That's just what they want. So it's about trying to work out actually why are they feeling like that.
Mm,
Try and lower the anxiety as much as possible. And then depending on the child, sometimes like I've had a little boy recently, so I'll kind of use this as an example, who wanted to hold dad's arm to go to sleep. So he wouldn't let go of dad's arm. And dad had said to me, I don't think there's any way he's ever going to sleep without holding onto my arm. But we kind of addressed the anxiety issues. We put in more things throughout the day to help lower his anxiety. And then we managed to find a pillow that was a sweet corn. So it was a lot of
mm,
pillow. And we did manage to replace dad's arm with the pillow. We started with dad's there, managed to get little boy to kind of latch on to this long sweet corn pillow, and eventually dad was able to move away, and he did start sleeping through the night with this pillow. Obviously it's not just the pillow that did it, we'd put other things in place too, but again, you kind of need to think outside the box. This is where in my job, all the traditional things you hear about sleep, and if you Google how to get a child to sleep through the night, probably not going to work for a neurodivergent child, because
mm,
the root issue is not, it's not just going to be that they just can't fall asleep. You know, it's simple that I just don't know how to put myself to sleep, or I
mm,
just want mummy and daddy there. There's going to be other things going on that we need to address too.
mm. Okay, this is great. Let's transition now to some of our questions about sensory.
Yeah,
Lots of kids want to rock, hum, fidget, move to fall asleep. Is that is this a problem? Is there something we can do to kind of promote a sensory friendly sleep environment? And I'm also going to add some of these kids share rooms, and so there's multiple children in the room.
it's difficult. Yeah, I mean, it's not a problem if a child does need to do that to go to sleep. My son, when he was younger, did used to kind of rock himself to sleep, and that can be quite common. I remember going to the doctor about it actually, because it looks a bit disturbing when you see a child kind of still sat up rocking and then he'd just flop down. Um, so it's not necessarily a problem, unless obviously they are kind of waking another child, like you using things like, often you hear of white noise being used, don't you, in the night. And from what I've read, most studies into using white noise with neurodivergent children is that actually it kind of sounds a bit like tinny and ringing. So it's not necessarily great. The sound that tends to work better is the noise of a fan. It tends to be more consistent, doesn't have that kind of like ringy undertone. So, you know, doing your best to kind of, if children are sharing rooms, to drown out any noise. If a child does need to kind of like hum or rock or fidget to sleep, is going to be, you know, the best thing you can do. In terms of like adapting the environment as well, that's it is something you need to look at. I actually have a free guide that's got like a checklist of checking the environment. So obviously I can give you details of that to share with
For sure.
people.
We'll put the links in
Um,
the show notes.
yeah, fab. And it really is looking at, is there a lot of clutter in the room? Is there something that could be distracting them? If there's lots of, like, people often will have like a projector or stars or something like that, some of those stimulating things are not going to help with sleep. So we want to make the environment as, free of those things as possible. But again, it is going to be dependent on the child and what their sensory needs are. Like I said, the little one that needed the light on, I've had that before. I had a little one who needed to feel, when we discovered this kind of by accident, but we put a fan in his room because he needed some kind of noise, and actually he moved it in the night. He was 7, so a little older, but he put the fan right near his face and needed to almost feel that air on his face in order to kind of relax, and that helped him sleep through the night. So it's, again, the environment, you do kind of need to think outside the box a bit and tailor it to the child, but some children do need that input, and that's why it's hard for them to fall asleep. If they're a sensory seeker,
Yeah.
it's hard to fall asleep because there is nothing to like feel or touch or fiddle with. We need to kind of think about those things and try and put them in place as best we can for them.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense for what one of my kids has been doing. One of my kids has what he calls bed pets, just little stuffed animals. He calls them
Okay.
bed pets. And he has to check in with each of them and then cover them with a blanket and then put the blanket in a certain position and then touch the blanket and then cover himself with a different blanket. And it's really sweet, actually, but it just explains a bit more of the why that's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And what he needs before he goes to bed. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, you mentioned a little bit about magnesium. I know you're not a doctor, and so I always, anytime people come to me and ask, can I use magnesium? Can I use melatonin? I always say, well, technically you have to clear that through your doctor, naturopath, pediatrician, whoever you use. But what's your non-medical official
Not medical.
opinion on using supplements like that?
Yeah. I mean, as you said, I'm not a healthcare professional, I'm not a doctor, so I can't advise somebody to use it or recommend that somebody use it. Like you said, you need to go to a healthcare professional for that. But obviously, I've worked with a lot of children who use melatonin or have tried melatonin. And in my experience, often parents think it's going to be like the magic cure and it's going to make the child suddenly sleep better. For some children, it can make them sleep better. For some, it's temporary, and then after a while, it's kind of stops working. In mainly in my experience, I find that it doesn't work unless the other factors have been addressed. So you kind of need the building blocks in place as well. Melatonin's not just going to mask if there are other root issues going on. So like addressing the sensory needs, looking at the circadian rhythm, looking at their anxiety levels, making sure the bedtime routine is right for them and the environment is right for them. Like all the things we've talked about already are in place. If everything else is in place, sometimes the melatonin can be like the cherry on top and can help a bit more. If the other things are not addressed, then it's probably not going to do an awful lot, or it's going to be very temporary. That's just the experience I've had, from talking to people and from working with families. Is that what you've
Yeah,
kind of heard as well? Or
yeah, that's great. We do use melatonin with two of our kids. We have four. We use two. We cleared it with the doctor first. We use a really, really, really low dose. Like we take the lowest dose and we break it in half and then we break
yeah.
that half in half. And so we use a really low dose. And it does help. I think it helps to take off just a little bit of that edge.
Mm.
It kind of helps them relax. But if we just give them melatonin, they'll still be up for hours if I'm not putting other helps in place. So I really
Yeah.
like that you brought that up.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned like magnesium as well, didn't you?
Yes.
And I do know that magnesium can definitely help with sleep too. It helps the body relax. So again, it's not something I can like recommend, but you can get more natural magnesiums. Like that would probably be my go-to before melatonin if somebody was thinking about using something, because yeah, you don't need to kind of get it prescribed. You do need to make sure you get the right magnesium for sleep though, because there are different types. So it's
What
worth
type is for
looking
sleep?
into.
Do you know, or is this a doctor
It's the
question?
glycinate one.
Okay.
So yeah, it needs to be magnesium glycinate.
Okay. So ask your doctor about using it. I think we
Yes,
made that disclaimer really clear there.
yes, we did.
Okay. Fantastic. So this is one that several of our parents have brought up because they are neurodivergent themselves. It's hard
Mm.
for them to feel like they're organized enough to start bedtime early enough for the kids to get quality sleep. So I don't know if you work much with adults, but if you just have any kind of beginner where they can start looking for advice to organize themselves to shift their kids' bedtime up. Does this question make sense?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, a lot of the families I work with, obviously, parents are neurodivergent too. So like, I do come across this where it is difficult to kind of organize. And again, like having it depends like on what your kind of preferences are. I mean, setting reminders, setting alarms. I actually have this with my partner. Like, I think if I wasn't here, I'm not sure he would even notice the time at all. It needs those reminders from me, and I need to be, yeah, reminding him and getting him to set alarms and write things down. All those kind of like classic things, really, or even having like a visual aid yourself. You can buy things, can't you, stick on the fridge or
Mhm.
something like that, just to kind of as a reminder of like when you need to start, because especially when you've got a neurodivergent child who's going to need that like time to get ready. It's not going to be like bam bam bam, your bedtime routine's probably done in 10 minutes. Those that you do need to start a bit earlier, don't you, to get it all done.
Yeah.
Does that
Oh,
answer
that's
the
great. I
question?
love that. I plan on at least an hour for bedtime each night.
Yeah,
And my
yeah,
mindset about it has shifted. It used to be like, oh, it's gonna take forever. Now I'm like, this is kind of enjoyable. Like I look forward to that hour of right before they fall asleep and spending that time with them instead of trying to get them to do it. So it's been a good
yeah,
shift for me.
definitely take the pressure off.
Yes. It does take more time. And I always want to validate. Yeah, it is challenging and it's going to take more time. It's just it's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think when I was trying to rush my children, get through it, because you are tired and you just want them in bed sometimes, don't you? But then you end up more stressed, and then that goes on to them, and then nobody's happy. So yeah, like I said, I just wait for my daughter when she's ready to brush her teeth. We do her teeth, and ours probably does take, yeah, probably about an hour as well until they're in bed. So it's just something we have adapted as a family.
Okay, that's great. So there's one more question from our community. Parents are wondering if there's some sort of sleep monitor or something that they can use to figure out how much sleep their child is actually getting. They have This particular parent has a kid who lets her leave the room, but he's awake when she leaves, he's awake when she comes
Oh
in again
yeah,
in the morning, and she doesn't really know how much sleep he's getting. I believe, can't remember if it was a he or she, but I believe the child's about 10, so it's an older
yeah.
kid.
Yeah, I don't know of a specific one, that will monitor that. I wonder if you could get almost like a watch or something. Like obviously I've got like
Mm,
an Apple Watch
yeah.
that tracks your sleep, doesn't it? So I wonder if you can get like a
Mm.
kid's version. But I'd need to look into it because I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
that's a
And
good
I
idea.
know, yeah, I know with like littler ones, we do something in the UK, and I don't know if you've got it in the US, called an owlet. And that is something that you put around their ankle and it kind of tracks the sleep. But again, I don't know what age that goes up to because it's
Okay.
generally kind of marketed at like littler ones. But I bet there probably is something on the market like that. I'd be interested to know myself. I may go away and look.
I think an Apple Watch might work, and I think you could even lock an Apple Watch so they would need a pin to open it.
Yeah, you
That is an
would.
idea.
Because mine definitely does track the sleep, and then it goes over to your phone, doesn't it? So you can look at how
Mm.
deep your sleep's been. Oh, actually, the other thing, I've just thought of something. My partner has got like a Google alarm clock, and it's next to his bed. I need to find out the name of it, but that tracks his sleep,
Oh,
and he can see how many deeper, like the different sleep cycles and how much deep sleep he's had and how much light sleep he's had. So it's worth looking at that. It's just a simple from Amazon, I think, Google alarm clock, but yeah, it does track everything like that on it. I don't know how it does it, but it does.
wow. Technology is amazing. It's only going to
Yeah,
take off from here. This is incredible. Okay,
yeah.
Lindsay, this has been amazing.
Oh,
Mind-blowing. So good. This is going to help so many parents. Before we wrap up, and everyone's going to want to connect with you, but before we do, can you share any final thoughts that you really want parents of neurodivergent kids to know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the main thing for me is that please don't think if you've got a neurodivergent child that they will never sleep well and that they can't sleep well. It definitely is possible. It's just, it is complex, and it's taking all those bits that we've talked about today, putting them all together so that it's the right fit for your child, thinking outside the box. Don't be scared to try different things. I've been down that road as well, where I think like, oh, I don't want to change anything in case she has a meltdown. But you don't know until you try. So sometimes you do need to tweak. I'm not talking about big changes here. A little change, something really minute, is still a step in the right direction. So, you know, think outside the box, make those changes. Your child can sleep well. It's just working out what's going to work for them. So that would be my kind of final thought.
Okay, so beautiful. Where can people find you? I'm sure they want to connect with you. You mentioned your free sleep guide. I'm
Yeah,
sure that they're going to want that. And I'm on your email list. It's beautiful. They'll want to be on your email list anyways. So let them know
thank
where to find
you.
that.
Yeah, sure. So my business that I work under is called Peaceful Sleep Secrets. So if they go to my website, peacefulsleepsecrets.com, you will see a specific kind of like tab that says autism and anxiety and sleep. And there you can find out more about the work I do. You can download the free guide. And I also have a specific page. I have my Peaceful Sleep Secrets Instagram page, which has got kind of generic sleep advice, but I have a separate one called Autism and Anxiety Sleep Coach with little underscores between it on Instagram. So do come and find me on there, because that's got all the specific advice for, yeah, for neurodivergent kids as well.
Fantastic. We will have the link down in the show notes. Hopefully everyone can come and join your world. Thank you again, Lindsey, for joining us today.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me, and I hope that's been useful for everyone.